Hello everyone, my name is Subhadeep Sarkar. I am a postdoc in the Disk Lab at Boston University. The title for today's talk is Constructing and Analyzing the LSM-compaction Design Space. This is a joint work with Dimitris, Zichen and my advisor Manos. Log structured merge tree or LSM-tree is a disk-based data structure that is widely used in modern NoSQL key value stores. Several relational and time series data stores also use LSMs under the hood. The reasons behind this widespread adoption of LSMs are high throughput for ingestion, good read performance, and great utilization of the disk space. LSMs are able to achieve this superior performance by batching writes and by periodically reorganizing the data layout on disk through a process called compaction. In practice, decisions on how we compact data and when we perform a compaction impact the LSM performance along several axes, including ingestion and query performance, space and write amplification, and even the delete performance. But state-of-the-art LSM engines treat compactions as a black box. This means, given a workload and an LSM tuning, it is hard to know how to maximize performance as the compaction routine is fixed. So our goal is to provide a roadmap that helps us pick the correct compaction strategy based on our performance requirement and to be able to answer complex design questions about the LSM compaction design space. To this end, we make the following contributions. We decompose the compaction black box into first order primitives to realize the full design space of LSM compactions. This allows us not only to create structured definitions for existing compaction strategies, but also to synthesize new compaction designs. We also perform more than 2000 experiments to build intuition on how each primitive affects performance for different workload and tuning. Let us begin with a quick overview of the LSM basics. LSMs store data in form of key value pairs. Incoming entries are first buffered in memory. When the buffer gets full, the entries are sorted and flushed to the disk as an immutable sorted run. As more buffers are flushed, the levels on disk keep accumulating more runs. To limit the number of sorted runs in the tree, runs of equal size are periodically sort merged and moved to a level with a larger capacity. We call this process of sort merging entries to create a tree-like structure compaction. So what constitutes a compaction strategy? If we take a deep dive into the internals of a compaction algorithm, we see that at its core, a compaction strategy entails a number of design choices. For example, how do we lay out the data on disk after compaction? And depending on how we answer this question, the resulting LSM trees might look very different from one another, affecting performance in different ways. Another such design question would be, during a compaction, should we compact all data in a level or should we break it into smaller chunks? But if we treat compactions as a black box, then it becomes very hard for us to know what are the different design choices being made underneath at the algorithmic level and how such choices affect performance. So our intuition here is that if we can identify and isolate the design primitives that make up a compaction algorithm, then by running a bunch of experiments, we can understand the interplay between the primitives and performance. Toward this, we identify the 4 first-order design decisions that are fundamental to any LSM compaction strategy. These are how to organize the data physically on storage, how much data to move at a time while reorganizing the data layout, which block of data to be moved, and when to reorganize the data layout. The answers to these questions give us the 4 design primitives for LSM compactions, namely the data layout, the compaction granularity, the data movement policy, and the compaction trigger. Let us now look at the construct of these individual design primitives. First, we have the data layout primitive. This determines the data organization on disk by controlling the number of runs per level. Performing compactions eagerly results in an LSM tree with 1 sorted run per level, whereas a lazy compaction strategy generates a tiered LSM. So depending on the compaction eagerness, we can have a continuum of hybrid data layouts with different number of runs at every level. For example, the one leveling layout has the first level with multiple sorted runs and the rest with only 1. L leveling, on the other hand, has only the last level with 1 run, while the other levels contain multiple. The second compaction primitive is the granularity of compaction, which defines the amount of data to be moved per compaction. A larger compaction granularity compacts all data from consecutive levels once a compaction is triggered. Alternatively, we can only move part of a level, typically a file, and compact it with overlapping files from the next level. For tiered variants, compactions are performed simply by sort merging all runs in a same level. For partial compactions, where we compact only part of a level, there is another design decision to be made about which file or files to be picked. This is characterized by a data movement policy. A carefully chosen data movement policy can help us optimize performance. For example, picking a file with the least overlap with the next level minimizes write amplification. Choosing the coldest file from a level improves the lookup performance, and so on. The final primitive is the compaction trigger, which determines when to trigger a compaction in a particular level. Classically, for leveled LSMs, whenever the size of a level goes beyond the threshold, we initiate a compaction. But we can also trigger compactions based on the staleness of a file in a level or the estimated space amplification of the LSM tree. These can help us optimize for space amplification and even the delete performance. And any LSM compaction strategy can be expressed as an ensemble of these 4 design primitives. This allows us to create a structured definition for any existing compactions and thereby help us construct the design space for LSM compactions. On top of this, by reasoning about the primitives, we can identify the gaps in the design space and synthesize new compaction strategies. But combining the different primitive values yields more than 1,000 different compaction strategies. Experimenting with each of these strategies with different workload and LSM tuning is not viable. So to explore this vast design space, we first need a blueprint for the experiments. We select 10 representative compaction strategies that are common in production and academic LSM systems. To ensure an apples-to-apples comparison, we implement all 10 compaction strategies on top of RocksDB. For each experiment, we track down more than 600 metrics. And we study this behavior in 3 phases. The first set of experiments give us the primitive level understanding about how the different primitives individually affect the performance metrics. Next, we design experiments to learn how the workload composition and the workload distribution influences the compaction performance. And finally, we vary the LSM tunings to understand their impact on compactions. I will discuss a few key observations here, but a detailed discussion on this can be found in the paper. Our first observation is that compacting data at a smaller granularity reduces the overall data movement due to compactions. LSMs are infamous for their high write amplification, which comes from compactions. And this cost can be reduced by nearly 45% when we compact only a part of a level instead of a whole level. A tiered data layout, of course, turned out to be the most write optimized, but this comes at the cost of a very high tail write latency. So as much of a fit tiering is for write intensive workloads, if we are concerned about the tail ingestion performance, then we should strictly avoid tiering. In terms of the point lookup performance, we observed that one leveling, which is a hybrid data layout with tiering in the first level, dominates other compaction strategies. And this advantage does not depend on the distribution of the workload. And this stable read and write performance offered by one leveling explains why it is the default compaction setting in RocksDB. Another interesting workload-specific observation is that as the fraction of updates in a workload increases, tiering begins to dominate the performance space both in terms of ingestion and lookups. While the advantages of tiering in terms of write performance get pronounced with more updates, we also observe that the high tail write latency for tiering diminishes with an increase in updates. Finally, about the LSM tuning influence, we experimented by varying several LSM tuning knobs such as the size ratio of a tree, the filter size, the block cache size, and we noticed that the relative behavior of the different compaction strategies do not change as we vary the LSM tuning, except for when we change the buffer size, which directly influences the size of the file on disk and therefore the compaction performance. So, to summarize, in this work we point out that understanding the internals of LSM compaction is key to improve performance. Toward this, we identify the first order primitives, a combination of which can define any existing and even new compaction algorithms. For example, if we set the compaction granularity to be file and the data layout to be tiered, we have a completely new compaction algorithm that retains the benefits of tiering but has a significantly low write latency. And finally, we perform an extensive set of experiments to understand the implications of the different primitives on performance and resource utilization. With that, I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you.